in a nutshell, the fundamental concept of my approach is fundamentally based on the on the understanding of the difference between what we call the act of thinking or the act of reasoning and what is known as thought or thought process, and therefore what is directly based on knowledge and therefore memory. To me, the understanding of this difference is absolutely crucial to really better the way we think, what we can call thinking abilities or thinking skills, and particularly nowadays is crucial because of obvious things. We have strong evidence that the average attention span is practically going downhill, dramatically actually, due to new technologies and a general increase of problems, including real problems, but also, and most importantly, known problems perceived by brains as problems. For instance, what I will identify as a known problem, very typical among teenagers, is the struggle of not having enough consensus online, on social media, etc. This is obviously a known problem, but we know that the brain is not wired genetically to distinguish between what is reality and what is not. Is only wired to create a mental representation of reality that, of course, is aimed at reaching a state of comfort and therefore a state of familiarity and therefore a state of security. That is basically what the brain, the human brain wants fundamentally. So now what we mean by thought is very important to understand and to go beyond the classical definition. The way I see it, thought is a physical phenomenon because it happens in the brain, and it literally, it can be, now with the technology we have, also the experimentation and the research in neuroscience and cognitive science, we can literally see a thought moving in the brain. What we call thought is a physical phenomenon because it happens like a neural network in the brain and supported, fomented and fueled by memories and by, obviously, the way we put together a thought after another, what we will call the so-called train of thoughts, how we put them together, and consequently, because it happens in the brain, it can obviously cause all sort of reactions, in the sense that depending on how we organize the thought processes in the brain, or better to say, how we let them do their things, the brain produces certain reactions that have even a psychosomatic outcome, obviously, including oscillations and movements in our psychology, in our mood, etc., etc., etc. Not to mention also chemical reactions, electric reactions, and neurological reactions, and so on. Now, if we understand this, what is the approach? Obviously, the approach cannot only be based on the mere knowledge of this, because if we have the knowledge of this, the knowledge itself gets intellectualized by the conscious brain, by our consciousness, gets intellectualized, and that also becomes a series of thoughts. So there is not really, it is important, of course, I'm not questioning it, the matter of storing knowledge. It is important. But alone, it does not represent a method or a strategy or an approach or a tool, let's say, capable of really comprehending how we think and intervening, not to control our thought processes, but in the sense of supervising our thought processes, especially as they come into being, as they arise in the brain. So to really monitor, and I repeat, not to control, but because control is also based on thoughts. Monitor, observe and monitor, and supervise, and therefore regulate the reactions that gets created by thoughts as the reaction arises. Obviously now I'm explaining this in a very banal form, because as a matter of fact, what I'm talking about is very complicated and really requires long explanation and a profound understanding that cannot be only intellectual. Otherwise, it becomes notion, and then we practically run to stand still. So we run to remain still, like spinning in circle, and usually what we do, if we like this approach, but we only understand it intellectually, we usually tend to create an ism, quindi a type of ideology, which is really something that has to be avoided entirely. So to put it in a graphic way, which I cannot do it now, because it's only my voice, but if I had a chalkboard, a blackboard, I would be prone to put it down graphically, because it is a different language, and sometimes it's more impacting and more efficient, the graphic language, than the verbal language. Is better sometimes to convey certain understanding of certain things. Putting this graphically, I will represent thought as a physical element in the brain, like a funny little creature moving around, and when it reaches other thoughts and stimulates memories, it creates a group of little creatures, and when the group is powerful enough, all of this makes the brain create a reaction. The reaction reaches the operational areas of the brain, and then there is this thing we call thinking, that is not something that should be based on thoughts. Thinking has to use thoughts, obviously, because it has to use the brain. In order to think, we have to use the brain. But if thinking is refined, then thinking is purely an action that is not inspired by the knowledge a person is around. It's an action that happens in the very moment in which it happens. And this action, if it is trained properly, educated properly, can actually monitor, can spot and monitor and observe actively the reactions created by thought processes as the reactions arises. Long story short, this means that this way to use our consciousness, instead of merely downloading new material mechanical in our brain and then reasoning through it, we can really, by applying this approach, we can really cause a switch and create a new type, new way to use our consciousness, capable of really supervising the reactions created by thought processes as they arise. And what is the benefit of this? Well, the benefit is what in academia is usually known as metacognition. But obviously, it has to go beyond that, because surely my intention is not to propose something that only remains in some corner, in some strange corner of academia. This is the fulcrum, really, in a nutshell. I repeat, this is a banal explanation, but I hope is capable of triggering some, at least, basic understanding of what I'm talking about.